scammer. What do you think you're doing here? Get out before I call security." The sharp voice cut through the polished lobby like a blade, drawing every eye toward the thin figure standing awkwardly near the reception desk. Elliot tightened his grip on the worn photograph in his hand, his other arm instinctively shielding the slight curve of his stomach. "I'm not a scammer," he said softly, his voice trembling but clear. I'm looking for the person in this picture." The man stepped closer, snatching the photo and glancing at it before letting out a cold, mocking laugh. "And what are you to him?" he asked, eyes sweeping over Elliot's limp, his faded clothes, the exhaustion he couldn't hide. Elliot hesitated for only a second, then answered with quiet certainty, "He's my alpha." A ripple of laughter spread through the space. The man shook his head, amused, almost impressed by the audacity. "Do you even know who this is?" he scoffed, holding up the photo for others to see. "This is Kai Vale, CEO of Vale Corporation. And you expect us to believe someone like him would know someone like you?" His smile sharpened. "The tricks scammers use these days are getting more creative." Security. Elliot took a step forward despite the way his leg faltered slightly. "Please," he said, his voice breaking just a little now. "I just need to see him. Just once. He'll recognize me." "What's going on here?" The calm, low voice silenced the room instantly. Conversation stopped. The air shifted. Elliot's breath caught in his throat as he turned toward the source of that voice. The one he had held on to through sleepless nights, through hunger, through quiet hope. And there he was, Kai Vale, unchanged, perfectly composed in a tailored suit, his presence as distant and untouchable as the skyline behind him. The man beside Elliot immediately straightened, his tone turning respectful. "Sir, this Omega has been causing a disturbance. He claims, quite boldly, actually, that you're the alpha of the child he's carrying." A pause. "Do you know him?" Elliot's heart pounded so hard it almost hurt. His fingers tightened unconsciously over his stomach, his eyes fixed on Kai, searching, waiting, for recognition, for warmth, for anything. Just one nod. That was all he needed. But Kai's gaze only swept over him briefly, indifferent, detached, as if he were looking at a stranger. "On the street. How could I possibly know someone like him?" he said flatly. The words fell like ice. "Give him some money and have him leave. Don't let this disrupt the workplace." For a moment, Elliot didn't understand what he had just heard. The voice was the same. The face was the same. But the person standing there wasn't. The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath his feet. He blinked. Once, twice, as if that might fix something that had already broken. His lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, quietly, almost as if he were afraid of being heard, he whispered, "I see." His fingers loosened around the photograph, but he quickly held on to it again, as if letting go would mean losing something far more important than paper. He lowered his gaze, forcing a small, polite smile that didn't quite hold. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "I must have mistaken you for someone else." No one laughed this time. Elliot turned slowly, careful not to stumble, and began to walk away, his steps uneven but steady, each one heavier than the last. He didn't look back, not even once. 1 year earlier, before the rain, before the silence, before that cold voice that no longer knew him, Elliot Gray's world had always been small, fragile, and painfully honest, tucked away in the forgotten corners of the city where broken streetlights flickered and the walls peeled like old wounds that never quite healed. And yet somehow, in that quiet ruin, he still found reasons to smile. He walked slowly down a narrow alley, one step uneven after the other, his limp noticeable but never stopping him, a worn canvas bag slung over his shoulder filled with whatever scraps of work he had managed to collect that day. His thin frame barely shielded from the cold by layers of faded clothing that had long since lost their original color. Strands of soft brown hair fell messily over his eyes, hiding most of his face from the world, as if he had learned early on that it was easier to be overlooked than to be judged. But every now and then, when the wind pushed those strands aside, there was something unexpectedly gentle in his features, something quietly beautiful that didn't match the harshness of his surroundings. He was tired, anyone could see that, but he didn't carry it like a burden. Instead, he hummed softly under his breath, an off-key tune that didn't belong to any song in particular, just something he had made up along the way, as if filling the empty space around him with a little warmth of his own making. "Okay," he murmured to himself as he counted the few crumpled bills in his hand. "This should be enough for bread. Maybe some soup, if I'm lucky." There was no bitterness in his voice, No frustration, just simple calculation followed by a small nod, like he had already accepted the answer before asking the question. He turned the corner, heading toward the dim street that led home, when something unusual caught his attention. A shape, half hidden in the shadow between two buildings, too still, too unnatural to ignore. Elliot slowed, his brows knitting slightly, and for a brief moment, hesitation flickered across his face. In a place like this, it was safer not to get involved. Everyone knew that. But then again, he had never been very good at choosing the safer option. "Hey," he called out softly, taking a cautious step closer, his uneven gait echoing faintly against the damp ground. "Are you okay?" No response. The figure didn't move. Elliot swallowed, his heart picking up just a little, and stepped closer, carefully, as if approaching something fragile rather than dangerous. "Excuse me," he tried again, crouching down slightly despite the strain it put on his leg, reaching out a tentative hand. "Can you hear me?" Before he could finish, a sudden force snapped around his wrist. His breath caught sharply as the man's eyes flew open, dark and sharp, filled with instinctive suspicion, his grip firm despite the clear signs of injury. Elliot froze, startled, his free hand instinctively lifting in surrender. I'm sorry," he said quickly, his voice soft but urgent. "I thought you were." He stopped himself, realizing how that might sound. "I just wanted to check if you were okay." The man's gaze stayed locked on him for a long second, scanning, calculating, searching for threat, but all he found was a thin omega with a trembling leg, wide, honest eyes, and absolutely no sign of danger. Slowly, reluctantly, his grip loosened. Elliot let out a small breath of relief, rubbing his wrist lightly before offering a gentle smile, as if nothing had just happened. "You're hurt," he said, noticing the blood seeping through the man's clothes now that he was closer. "We should get you to a hospital." "No," the man said immediately, his voice low, firm despite the strain beneath it. "No hospitals. No calls. No one." Elliot blinked, surprised by the urgency. "But you're—" "I said no," the man repeated, sharper this time, his gaze hardening again. "There are people looking for me." A pause. "I can't be found." Elliot hesitated, looking at him properly now, really seeing him. The expensive cut of his clothes, the watch at his wrist, the way even in this state, there was something controlled, something unmistakably out of place in a setting like this. He didn't fully understand it, but he understood enough to know this wasn't simple. "Okay," Elliot said finally, nodding once. "Then, come with me." The man frowned slightly, suspicion flickering again. "Why?" Elliot tilted his head, as if the question itself didn't quite make sense. "Because you're hurt," he answered simply. "You can stay at my place until you feel better." The man stared at him, clearly unconvinced, clearly expecting some kind of hidden motive, but Elliot only smiled, shifting his weight carefully as he stood up, offering his hand without hesitation. "It's not much," he added lightly, "but it's warm enough." And for reasons he couldn't quite explain, the man accepted. Elliot's home was exactly what he had warned: small, worn, barely holding together, but clean in its own quiet way, every object placed with care, as if even the simplest things deserved respect. Getting the man inside took effort, Elliot's uneven steps slowing them both down, but he didn't complain once, didn't rush, just focused on getting him somewhere safe. Once inside, Elliot moved quickly, gathering what little medical supplies he had, his movements careful but efficient as he helped the man out of his outer layers, revealing injuries that made his breath hitch slightly despite himself. "This might sting a little," he murmured, more as reassurance than warning, his hands steady as he cleaned and dressed the wounds with surprising skill. The man watched him the entire time, eyes sharp, wary, taking in every detail. The way Elliot avoided looking directly at anything expensive, the way he didn't react to the watch, the clothes, the clear signs of wealth, as if they meant nothing at all. Or perhaps he simply didn't recognize them. That thought unsettled him more than anything else. Elliot worked quietly, occasionally speaking just to fill the silence, light, casual things that didn't require answers, as if conversation was something he offered freely, without expectation. When he finally finished, he stepped back slightly, giving the man space. "You should rest," he said gently. "Your body will heal faster if you do." The man didn't respond immediately, still studying him, still trying to understand what he couldn't see. "Why are you helping me?" he asked finally. Elliot blinked, surprised by the question, then smiled again, softer this time. "Because you needed help," he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Days passed, and Elliot fell into a quiet routine, leaving early for work, returning late with exhaustion written into every step. His limp more pronounced by the end of each day, but never once did he fail to check the bandages, to bring food, to make sure the man was comfortable before thinking of himself. The meals were simple, barely enough, but Elliot always placed the better portion in front of him without hesitation, taking only a small piece of bread for himself. At first, the man assumed it was strategy, an attempt to gain favor, to secure some future reward, but the pattern didn't change, didn't falter, no matter how tired Elliot became. One evening, watching Elliot nibble quietly on a dry piece of bread while pushing the rest toward him, the man finally spoke. "You work all day," he said, his tone quieter now, less sharp. "Why don't you treat yourself better?" Elliot looked up, caught off guard, then laughed softly, a little embarrassed. "Oh, it's nothing like that," he said, scratching his cheek lightly. "The medicine I got for you, it's from a private source. It's a bit expensive." The man's gaze darkened slightly. "And that's why you're not eating properly?" Elliot shook his head quickly. No, I eat enough," he insisted, even as he held up the small piece of bread. "See?" A pause. "Besides, you're the patient. You need more strength to recover." Something shifted in the man's expression then, something subtle but undeniable. He pushed the plate back slightly, splitting the portion in half and sliding it toward Elliot. "Eat," he said simply. Elliot blinked, surprised, then smiled, a little brighter than before. "Okay," he agreed easily. "We'll share." And for the first time since he had arrived, the man didn't argue. From that day on, something changed, not all at once, not dramatically, but enough for him to notice. The suspicion didn't disappear, but it softened, replaced by something else he wasn't used to feeling. Curiosity, and something quieter, something warmer. Because no matter how hard he looked, no matter how carefully he watched, he couldn't find a single sign that Elliot was pretending. And somehow, that unsettled him more than anything else ever had. The next morning, the first thing Kai noticed was the unfamiliar stillness. No guards, no assistants, no phone within reach, just the faint creak of an old window and the quiet clatter of dishes from the other side of the room. For a brief second, irritation flickered across his face, sharp and instinctive, before reality settled back in. He had nothing. No contact. No way to reach anyone. And more importantly, no cash. His gaze dropped to his wrist, lingering on the one thing he still had left. The watch. A limited edition piece, custom crafted, worth more than most people in this city would earn in years. He hesitated for a moment, his jaw tightening slightly, then unclasped it with a quiet click. When Elliot stepped back into the room, still tying the loose sleeve of his worn shirt, Kai held the watch out toward him without explanation. "Sell this," he said. Elliot blinked, clearly surprised, his eyes moving from the watch to Kai's face. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "It looks important." "It is," Kai replied flatly. "Which is why it'll cover the cost of your black market medicine and food." A pause. "Consider it living expenses." Elliot hesitated for only a second before nodding, carefully taking the watch in both hands like it was something fragile. "Okay," he said, his tone light, almost reassuring. "I'll be back soon." He left with the same uneven steps, his limp more noticeable in the daylight. But his pace didn't slow, his expression still carrying that quiet, unshaken optimism that Kai still didn't understand. Hours later, the door creaked open again, and Elliot stepped in, slightly out of breath but smiling, bright, genuine, like he had just accomplished something worth celebrating. "I sold it," he said, holding out a small stack of bills with both hands, almost proud. "Look, it's a lot more than I expected." Kai's eyes narrowed slightly as he took the money, quickly counting it. For a moment, he said nothing. "Then this is it." Elliot tilted his head. "Yeah, isn't it a lot?" Kai let out a short, incredulous breath, his gaze sharpening. "That watch," he said slowly, "is worth at least 20 times this." Silence. Elliot blinked. Once. Twice. 20 times, he repeated, his voice small, almost disbelieving. "That's not possible." He shook his head lightly, a soft laugh escaping him. "With this amount alone, I could live for almost a year." Kai stared at him, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that this was some kind of act. There was none, just pure, unfiltered surprise. No regret, no calculation, just acceptance. "You didn't even question the price?" Kai asked, his tone sharper now. Elliot rubbed the back of his neck, looking slightly embarrassed. I mean, he said it was the best offer I'd get, he admitted. And I thought, it already seemed like a lot. Kai exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, frustration flickering briefly. You're unbelievably naive, he muttered. Elliot didn't argue. He just smiled a little, softer this time. Maybe, he said. But it's okay. We have enough now, right? That answer didn't make sense. And yet, somehow it did. Kai fell silent after that, the irritation fading as quickly as it had come. He had expected greed, expected some hidden motive. But this was something else entirely. Someone who didn't even recognize value the way the world defined it. Someone who didn't see opportunity where others would. Just someone who wanted things to be enough. Forget it, Kai said finally, leaning back slightly. This will do for now. It wasn't worth drawing attention to himself. Not yet. His people would find him soon enough. And until then, this was manageable. The days that followed settled into something almost routine. Something Kai had never experienced before. Elliot left early every morning, his uneven steps fading into the distance, and returned late, shoulders slumped with exhaustion, but eyes still carrying that same quiet brightness. No matter how tired he was, he always greeted Kai with a soft, easy smile, like seeing him there made the day worth it. Meals were simple, sometimes barely more than scraps, but they were always shared. Conversations, however, were never in short supply. Elliot talked, a lot, about small things, pointless things, things that didn't matter. And somehow, Kai found himself listening. The old TV only works if you hit it twice on the side, Elliot explained one evening, crouching slightly as he tapped the worn casing with careful precision. The screen flickered, then steadied into a grainy image. See? It's kind of like magic. Kai raised an eyebrow. That's not magic. Elliot laughed, light and unbothered. It is if it works. They sat there, side by side, watching something neither of them really paid attention to, the soft glow of the screen filling the small room. Elliot occasionally commented on the plot, guessing things incorrectly more often than not, but never seeming bothered when he was wrong. I think he's the villain, he said at one point, pointing at the screen. He looks suspicious. He's been dead for the last 10 minutes, Kai replied dryly. Elliot paused, then laughed again. Oh, then maybe not. It didn't make sense. None of it did. The space was too small. The food was too simple. The life was too ordinary. And yet, Kai found himself staying, watching, listening, not because he had to, but because, somewhere along the way, the constant noise of his world, the expectations, the control, the pressure, had been replaced by something quieter, something easier. Elliot didn't treat him like someone important, didn't try to gain anything from him, didn't even seem to understand what he was worth. He just treated him like a person. And that, more than anything else, was what unsettled Kai the most. 3 weeks passed quietly, almost unnoticed, marked only by the slow healing of wounds and the subtle changes neither of them spoke about out loud. By then, Kai had regained enough strength to stand without strain, to move without that sharp edge of pain shadowing every motion, and it didn't sit right with him, not even a little, that he was still living under the care of someone like Elliot. A crippled Omega, barely getting by, yet somehow feeding him, tending to him, making space for him without ever asking for anything in return. It was absurd, unacceptable. So one morning, before Elliot returned from work, Kai left, not to disappear, but to fix things. For someone like him, making money wasn't difficult. It never had been. Even stripped of his identity, his status, his network, there was still something about him. His presence, his sharp instincts, the way he spoke and carried himself, that opened doors easily. Within days, he had secured temporary work, and within a week, he was earning more than enough to cover not just himself, but both of them. When Elliot came home that evening, limping slightly worse than usual from a long shift, he stopped short at the doorway. The room looked different. The broken window had been fixed properly this time. The loose boards in the floor no longer creaked. Even the dim light felt warmer somehow. Oh, Elliot blinked, clearly surprised. Did you do all this? Kai didn't look up from where he was adjusting something near the wall. It was falling apart, he said simply. Elliot stepped inside slowly, his uneven gait softer now, like he was afraid to disturb something fragile. Then he smiled, wide, bright, completely unguarded. It looks amazing. That smile lingered in Kai's mind longer than it should have. From that day on, things shifted again. Kai no longer sat and waited. He worked. He brought back food, better food, warm meals, sometimes even things Elliot had never tried before. And Elliot true to himself, reacted with the same open delight every time, like each small improvement was something worth celebrating. Their lives, simple as they were, began to take shape around each other. There were moments, small, fleeting, but impossible to ignore. Like the time Elliot nearly lost his balance reaching for something too high, his bad leg giving out just slightly. Kai caught him before he could fall, his hand firm around Elliot's arm, pulling him back. For a second, they were too close. Elliot blinked up at him, startled, then laughed softly. That happens sometimes, he admitted, a little embarrassed. Kai didn't let go immediately, and when he did, something in his chest felt off. Or the night Elliot fell asleep sitting up, his head slowly tipping until it came to rest against Kai's shoulder. Kai froze at first, instinctively tense, but Elliot didn't move, his breathing soft, steady, completely trusting. Kai glanced down at him, at the strands of hair falling across his face, at the peaceful expression that looked so different from the exhaustion he carried during the day. His heartbeat picked up, unexpectedly, unreasonably. He frowned slightly, looking away, but didn't move him. He stayed like that until Elliot woke up on his own. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Kai Vale didn't get attached, didn't get distracted, and certainly didn't feel anything close to this for someone like Elliot. And yet, one afternoon, Kai saw it clearly for the first time. Elliot was outside, speaking to someone near the alley, his posture still gentle, still polite, but the other man's tone was anything but harsh, mocking, dismissive. Kai couldn't hear every word, but he didn't need to. He saw the way Elliot's fingers tightened slightly, the way he shifted his weight to stay steady, the way he smiled, still smiling, despite it all. Something sharp twisted in Kai's chest. Before he realized it, he was already there. That's enough, he said coldly. The other man turned, startled, clearly not expecting interference. Kai's gaze didn't waver. Leave. There was no room for argument in his voice. The man scoffed at first, but something in Kai's expression made him hesitate, then back off with a muttered complaint. Elliot blinked, surprised, watching him. You didn't have to do that, he said softly. Kai didn't answer right away, because he knew something now. He couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand seeing Elliot treated like that. Couldn't stand the idea of him being hurt by anyone. That realization settled quietly, heavily, impossible to ignore. That night, Kai didn't deny it anymore. He cared, more than he should. A few days later, he came back with more than just food. He had found something valuable during work, a deal that paid unexpectedly well. We should celebrate, he said, placing the bags down. Elliot's eyes lit up immediately. Really? The small room filled with warmth that night. Real food, simple laughter, and a cheap bottle of alcohol that neither of them was used to, but shared anyway. The edges of the world softened just enough for words to come easier, for truths to slip through. Your leg, Kai said at one point, his voice quieter now. What happened? Elliot paused, the smile fading just slightly, not disappearing, just softening. When I was 13, he began, his tone gentle, almost distant. My parents were still alive. A faint warmth touched his expression. We were poor, but we were really happy. He took a small breath. One day, we were crossing the street, and a car hit us. Silence. My parents didn't make it. His hand moved unconsciously to his leg. My mom pushed me out of the way, but I still got caught. Kai's jaw tightened. The driver? Elliot shook his head lightly. Someone powerful. Rich. A small smile, strangely calm. They paid a little money, and that was it. No consequences. Kai's voice dropped. Do you hate them? Elliot looked at his glass for a moment. I did, he admitted softly. But hating doesn't change anything, does it? Kai didn't answer. My parents. Elliot continued, his voice warmer now. They always laughed. Even when things were hard. They said, as long as you keep believing in good things, something good will come eventually. He smiled again, faint but real. I think. I just never forgot that. A pause. Then, softer, almost shy. And right now, I think I'm pretty lucky. Kai looked at him. Lucky? Elliot nodded, his cheeks faintly flushed. I have a job. I have food. I have people who are kind to me. He hesitated, then added quietly. And now, I have you. Something in Kai's chest tightened sharply. Before Elliot could look away, Kai reached out, his hand closing around Elliot's. Warm. Real. Elliot's breath caught slightly, his eyes widening just a little. Kai didn't give himself time to think. He pulled him closer, his other hand lifting gently to brush aside the hair that hid his face, and for the first time, really seeing him. Then he leaned in. and the distance between them disappeared. The morning light slipped quietly through the patched window, soft and pale, settling over the small room like a fragile promise of another ordinary day. And for the first time in a long while, Kai didn't wake with tension in his body or calculation in his mind. Instead, he woke to warmth, to stillness, to Elliot. Elliot lay curled slightly against him, breathing slow and even, his hand loosely resting against Kai's chest as if he had fallen asleep without realizing how close they had become. And for a moment, Kai didn't move. He just watched. There was something deeply unfamiliar about this quiet sense of contentment, of having nothing to guard against, nothing to plan for, and yet it didn't feel wrong. It felt right. "So this is what you look like when you're not talking?" he murmured softly, almost amused. Carefully, he lifted a hand and brushed aside the strands of hair that had always fallen messily across Elliot's face, the same strands that had hidden him from the world, from judgment, from being seen. This time, Kai didn't stop halfway. He moved them all aside, and stilled. For a second, he didn't breathe. Elliot's face, fully revealed in the soft morning light, was nothing like the tired, hidden image he had grown used to. It was gentle, striking in a quiet way, the kind of beauty that didn't demand attention, but once seen, was impossible to forget. "What a waste," Kai muttered under his breath, almost incredulous. Hiding a face like this behind that ridiculous hair. His thumb lingered near Elliot's cheek, not quite touching, as something softer settled in his gaze. "I really did pick up something valuable," he thought, the idea forming without resistance. Not out of calculation, not out of habit, just naturally. "When this is over," he added silently, "I'll take you with me." Elliot stirred slightly at the movement, his brows knitting faintly before his eyes slowly opened, still hazy with sleep. For a brief moment, he looked confused, then he realized where he was, who he was with, and immediately, warmth rushed to his face. "Ah." He shifted, trying to pull away, instinctively retreating into the blanket. "Good morning." Kai's lips curved slightly at the reaction, amused. He didn't let him escape. Reaching forward, he caught the edge of the blanket and tugged it down just enough to expose Elliot's flustered expression again. "What are you hiding for?" he said casually. "We've already done everything there is to do." Elliot's face flushed even deeper, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's not." He didn't get to finish. Kai leaned in, closing the distance without hesitation, his hand steady at Elliot's side as he pressed another kiss against him. This one slower, unhurried, like he had no intention of letting the moment pass so easily. Elliot tensed for only a second before melting into it, his fingers clutching lightly at Kai's sleeve, his earlier embarrassment dissolving into something softer, something warmer. Time slipped quietly after that. Days blurred together in a way that neither of them tried to stop. Their small space became something else entirely, not just a place to stay, but a place to belong. Elliot laughed more, talked more. His steps, though still uneven, seemed lighter somehow, as if the weight he carried had shifted just enough to let him breathe. He no longer rushed from one job to another without pause. There was time now, for meals, for conversation, for small moments that felt bigger than they should have. Kai, in turn, stayed closer, touched more, watched more. He didn't question it anymore, didn't analyze it. He simply followed it. What they had wasn't defined, didn't need to be. It just existed, strong, unavoidable, like something that had been waiting to happen all along. A month passed like that, quietly, naturally, until one afternoon, something changed. Elliot was at work when it hit him, a sudden wave of dizziness that made his vision blur, his body swaying slightly as he tried to steady himself against the counter. "Hey, are you okay?" the young girl beside him asked, concern immediately replacing her usual cheerful tone. Elliot blinked, trying to shake it off. "I'm fine, just a little." The smell of food hit him mid-sentence, and his stomach twisted sharply. He turned away quickly, covering his mouth, his breath uneven. The girl's expression shifted. "That's not normal," she said gently. "You should go get checked." Elliot hesitated, then nodded. The result came quicker than he expected. And when he heard it, he didn't react right away. He just sat there, hands resting lightly over his stomach, as if trying to understand something that felt both impossible and inevitable. A small life, growing quietly inside him, his and Kai's. The thought made his chest tighten, not with fear, not entirely, but with something deeper, something fragile, something hopeful. "He'll be happy, right?" he whispered to himself, uncertain for the first time in a long while. That evening, Elliot returned home early, moving carefully as he prepared a meal far more elaborate than usual, his movements slow but deliberate, his expression filled with a quiet anticipation he couldn't quite hide. He set everything neatly, waiting and waiting. The light faded. The room grew darker. The food cooled. Elliot checked the door. Again and again. He reached for his phone, calling once, twice. No answer. Just silence. Maybe he's just late, he murmured, trying to reassure himself. But something in his chest had already begun to sink. The hours stretched longer. He couldn't sit still anymore. Grabbing his coat, he stepped out, his uneven steps quickening despite the strain, his breath shallow as he searched every place he could think of. The streets, the corners, the places Kai had mentioned in passing. Have you seen him? He asked. Again and again. No one had. One day passed, then two, then a week, then two. And just like that, Kai Vale was gone. No trace. No explanation. No. Goodbye. As if he had never been there at all. Elliot stood alone in that small room, one hand resting over his stomach, the other clutching the edge of the table for balance, his gaze fixed on the empty space where someone used to be. If not for the quiet, steady proof growing inside him, he might have believed it had all been a dream. A beautiful one, and far too short. The room felt smaller after he was gone. Not because anything had changed, but because everything had. Elliot sat quietly on the edge of the bed, his fingers resting lightly on the blanket where Kai used to sit, his gaze lingering there just a little too long before he finally looked away. The silence was different now. He noticed it most at night, when there was no voice beside him, no quiet presence filling the space, no one to share even the smallest, most meaningless moments with. For a few days, he still found himself turning toward the door at the slightest sound, a habit he couldn't quite stop. But slowly that, too, faded. He's not coming back, Elliot whispered to himself one morning, not with bitterness, not with anger, just quiet acceptance. His hand moved instinctively to his stomach, resting there with a gentle firmness. But that's okay. His voice softened, steadier than before. I still have you. And that was enough to make him straighten his back, to push himself up, to take another step forward, uneven, but determined. Life didn't stop. It never did. Without Kai, everything became heavier again. The work, the expenses, the constant pressure of surviving one more day. And now, there was more than just himself to think about. He needed money, more than before, for the baby, for the future. But reality was cruel in ways Elliot had long since learned not to question. A poor Omega, already physically limited, now carrying a child. No one saw that as someone worth hiring. At his current job, the owner didn't say it directly. He didn't have to. The polite smile, the awkward hesitation, the envelope pressed into Elliot's hands, it was all enough. Take some time to rest, the man said gently. Elliot understood. He always did. Thank you, he replied, bowing slightly despite the tightness in his chest. He didn't argue, didn't ask to stay, just accepted it, the same way he accepted everything else. Outside, the world didn't get any kinder. If anything, it got louder. People noticed. They always did. And people talked. So he finally left. Huh? Someone said, not even bothering to lower their voice. I knew it. A guy like that. With him, another voice laughed. He really thought he got lucky. A frog dreaming of being with a swan. Guess frogs belong in the mud after all. The word stung, but Elliot didn't react. He just kept walking, one uneven step after another, his head slightly lowered, his hand resting protectively over his stomach. He didn't defend himself. Didn't explain. There was nothing to say. Not when he already knew the truth they couldn't see. Not when the memories he held were more real than anything they believed. The only one who spoke up was the old woman next door. That's enough. Her voice cut through sharply, surprising everyone. Mind your own lives before you judge someone else's. Her frail frame trembled slightly, but her eyes were fierce, unwavering as she stood in front of Elliot like a shield. Elliot blinked, caught off guard, then smiled softly. It's okay, he said gently. Really. But the warmth that spread through his chest lingered long after. Days blurred together after that. Rejection became routine. So did the exhaustion. Some days, he ate less. Some days, he didn't eat at all. Every dollar mattered. Every choice mattered. He learned to stretch what little he had, to ignore the constant ache in his body, to smile even when his legs trembled beneath him. One evening, after another long string of refusals, Elliot pushed open the door to a small, worn-down diner tucked between two empty storefronts. The smell of simple cooking filled the air, nothing fancy, Nothing rich, but warm. Real. He stepped inside quietly, choosing the cheapest item on the menu, his voice soft as he placed the order. The owner, a middle-aged man with tired eyes but steady hands, glanced at him briefly, taking in the limp, the thin frame, the faint pallor that didn't quite hide the strain. When the food came, there was more than what Elliot had paid for. "You ordered one," the man said casually, setting down the plate. "But I made extra." Elliot blinked, surprised. I can't pay for this." "Did I ask you to?" the man replied, already turning away. Elliot hesitated for a moment, then bowed his head slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice warm, sincere. He ate slowly, carefully, as if each bite mattered, which it did. When he finished, he lingered for a second longer than necessary, fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the table before he finally spoke again. Do you happen to need help?" The man paused, looked at him properly this time, thought for a moment. "This place doesn't really need more people," he admitted. Elliot nodded quickly. "Oh, I see. That's okay, but," the man added, cutting him off, "if you're willing to work, I won't turn you away." Elliot froze. Then his face lit up, bright, genuine, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Really, I'll work hard," Elliot said immediately, bowing again, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Thank you." And just like that, he had something again. Not much, but enough. The work was tiring, but manageable. The owner was fair, quietly kind in ways that didn't draw attention. And sometimes, when customers got difficult, when their words turned sharp, mocking, unnecessary, the man would step in without hesitation. "If you don't like the service, you can leave," he said once, his tone calm but firm, placing himself between Elliot and a particularly rude customer. Elliot watched, a little surprised, a little grateful. "It's okay," he murmured afterward. The man just shrugged. "People like that don't deserve your patience." Elliot smiled softly. "I don't mind." "I do," the man replied simply. Even the young girl working there, bright, energetic despite her own struggles, found small ways to help. "I found these," she said one day, handing Elliot a small bundle of neatly folded clothes. "They're not new, but they should help." Elliot blinked, touched. "You didn't have to. I wanted to," she said quickly, smiling. Elliot held the clothes carefully, his fingers tightening slightly as warmth spread through his chest. "Thank you," he said again, softer this time. Life was still hard. Nothing about that had changed. But somehow, it didn't feel as cold anymore. Not when there were still people like this. Not when kindness, even in small forms, still existed. Elliot walked home that night with slower steps, his hand resting lightly over his stomach, a faint smile lingering on his lips. "We'll be okay," he whispered quietly. And for the first time in a while, he believed it. Time passed quietly, like water slipping through fingers no matter how tightly one tried to hold it. And before Elliot realized it, the days had turned into months, his body growing heavier, his steps slower, his limp more pronounced under the weight he now carried not just in his leg, but in the life forming inside him. 7 months. Sometimes he would sit by the small window, one hand resting over his stomach, feeling the gentle movements beneath his palm, and smile to himself. "You're getting stronger," he would whisper softly. "You must be just like him." He had already given the baby a name, Lily. Something soft, something bright, something that felt like hope. That afternoon started like any other, until his phone rang unexpectedly. Elliot blinked in surprise when he saw the caller ID. It was the young girl from the diner. "Hello," he answered, a little breathless. "Elliot, turn on the TV." "No, wait, I'll send you a picture." Her voice was rushed, excited, almost shaking. "I just saw someone. I think it looks like him." Elliot's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" But before she could answer, his phone buzzed again. A message. A photo. Elliot opened it, and the world seemed to stop. There he was, Kyle, standing under bright lights, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his expression calm, distant, untouchable. The same face, the same eyes, the same presence that had once filled a small, broken room with quiet warmth. Elliot's fingers trembled slightly as he stared at the image, his breath catching somewhere deep in his chest. "It's him," he whispered, almost to himself. His heart began to race, not painfully, not like before, but fast, overwhelming, filled with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for a long time. "Hope. I knew it," the girl's voice came through again. "I knew you weren't lying. He's the CEO of Vale Corporation, Elliot. A huge company. Like, really huge." Elliot didn't respond right away. His eyes were still fixed on the screen, searching, comparing, remembering. The way he stood, the way he looked, the way he spoke in the short clip she sent after. It was all the same. It had to be him. And yet, a quiet fear crept in. A CEO, Elliot murmured, his grip tightening slightly around the phone. Someone like that. He lowered his gaze slowly, his reflection faintly visible on the dark screen. Thin, worn, one leg slightly bent to support his balance. A body marked by hardship and time. That's not my world. Elliot, the girl said firmly, cutting through his thoughts. Stop overthinking. If it's him, then it's him. You should go see him. What if I'm wrong? Elliot asked softly. You're not, she insisted. And even if you are, at least you'll know. A long pause. Elliot closed his eyes for a second, taking a slow breath, his hand instinctively resting over his stomach. Lily shifted gently, as if responding. And that was enough. Okay, he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. I'll go. Standing in front of the towering building later that day, Elliot felt smaller than he ever had before. The glass walls reflected a world he didn't belong to, people in clean suits, confident steps, voices that carried authority. He hesitated at the entrance, his uneven stance making him more aware of every step he took. But he didn't turn back. He couldn't. Not anymore. The journey up to that moment felt like a blur. Words spoken, questions asked, eyes judging. And then, him. Kyle. Elliot's heart had pounded so hard it hurt. And then, it stopped. Because the man standing there looked at him, like a stranger. Elliot didn't stay long after that. He couldn't. The strength it took just to stand there had already drained everything out of him. So he left. Quietly. The way he always did. By the time he returned home, the sky had already darkened. His phone rang again almost immediately. What happened? The girl's voice demanded. Elliot hesitated for a moment before answering, his tone calm. Too calm. I think. I was mistaken. Silence. Then, that's impossible, she snapped. After everything you told me? After what I saw. That guy is a complete jerk. No, worse. He's a coward. A selfish, ungrateful. Hey. Elliot interrupted gently. The girl stopped. Elliot smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see it. Don't say that. Why not? She shot back. He treated you like that. How can you still defend him? Elliot lowered his gaze, his hand resting lightly over his stomach. Because he's not that kind of person, he said softly. He wouldn't leave, or say those things, without a reason. What reason could possibly justify that? Elliot didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. Steady. Even if he doesn't come back, he said. It's okay. The girl fell silent. The time I spent with him. Elliot continued, his lips curving slightly. Those were the happiest days of my life. A pause. Someone like me, getting to be with someone like him. That's already more than I ever expected. His fingers pressed gently against his stomach. And now I have Lily. His voice softened further. He didn't leave me with nothing. He gave me a family. On the other end of the line, the girl didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was quieter. You're unbelievable, you know that. Elliot laughed softly. Maybe. After the call ended, the room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't the same silence as before. Elliot stood there for a while, unmoving, his expression calm. Then, slowly, his shoulders lowered. And the tears came. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just quietly, steadily, as if something he had been holding back for too long had finally been given permission to exist. He sank down onto the bed, one hand covering his face, the other still resting over his stomach. Just today, he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. Just this once. His shoulders trembled, his breath uneven, the quiet sound of his crying filling the small room that had once held laughter, warmth, and something he had dared to call love. He cried for the memories, for the loss, for the version of himself that had believed things could stay that way forever. And when the tears finally slowed, when the weight in his chest eased just enough for him to breathe again, he wiped his face gently, exhaling a long, quiet breath. That's enough, he murmured to himself. His hand moved over his stomach, gentle, grounding. Tomorrow, we keep going. His voice steadied. We have to, because life didn't stop, and neither could he. The day it happened, everything had felt normal. Kai had left early, just like always, the city still half asleep beneath a pale morning sky, his steps steady, his mind already moving through a dozen tasks ahead of him, sharp and controlled as ever. There was no warning, no time to react, just the sudden, violent sound of an engine tearing through silence, and then, impact. The world flipped. Pain burst sharply at the back of his head as his body hit the ground, his vision scattering into fragments of light and shadow. For a split second, everything went quiet. Then another car screeched to a halt. Doors slammed open. "Sir." Voices, urgent, controlled. Dark figures rushed toward him, forming a barrier, lifting him carefully, efficiently. "We've secured the area. Get him to the hospital. Now." The rest blurred into nothing. When Kai opened his eyes again, the world was sterile, bright, distant. The faint smell of antiseptic filled the air, machines humming softly around him. His head felt heavy, his thoughts slower. "You're awake." A voice. Professional. Calm. Kai blinked, his gaze sharpening instinctively as he tried to sit up, only to be stopped by a firm hand. "Easy. You've suffered a concussion. Some memory disruption is expected." Memory disruption. The words lingered. Kai frowned slightly, reaching for something. Anything, but finding only fragments. His name, his identity, his work, all intact. But something was missing, something he couldn't quite define. "Do you remember what happened?" the doctor asked. "An accident," Kai replied, his voice steady, though something in his chest felt unsettled. "An attempt," the doctor corrected gently. "You were targeted." That made sense. It fit. His enemies. His world. That part was clear. But the emptiness remained. A quiet gap in his memory, subtle enough to ignore, but persistent enough to disturb. In the days that followed, Kai did what he always did. He investigated. Carefully. Thoroughly. He retraced his steps, reviewed what little information he could access about his movements during the time he couldn't fully recall. But there was nothing. No clear trail. No records. No witnesses that mattered. He let out a quiet, humorless breath one night, leaning back in his chair. "I was too careful," he muttered. In the past, that had been a strength. Now it worked against him. Whatever had happened during that missing time, he had left no trace of it behind. And yet, he was alive. Which meant one thing. Someone had helped him. That thought lingered longer than the rest. But time didn't allow him to dwell on it. His world didn't pause for uncertainty. The people who had tried to take him down were still out there. Still moving. Still dangerous. And so he returned to what he knew best. Control. Strategy. Action. Months passed in a blur of calculated decisions and relentless pressure. One by one, the remnants of his enemies were dealt with, quietly, efficiently, leaving no room for retaliation. His subordinates had already done most of the groundwork. The rest, he handled himself. 6 months. That was how long it took for everything to finally settle. For the last loose ends to disappear. For the board to unanimously confirm what had already been inevitable. CEO of Vale Corporation. A position that fit him perfectly. A role he stepped into without hesitation. Without doubt. Everything was back where it belonged. Almost. Because every now and then, unexpectedly, he would feel it. That same faint, unsettling emptiness. Like reaching for something that should have been there, and finding nothing. He ignored it. He had more important things to focus on. Until the day that Omega appeared. The moment the report reached him, Kai barely reacted at first. "An Omega is causing a disturbance in the lobby," his assistant informed him. "He claims you are the father of his child." Kai didn't even look up from the document in front of him. "Handle it." "We tried." The assistant hesitated. "He insists on seeing you." A pause. Irritation flickered briefly. "Fine," Kai said, closing the file with a quiet snap. "I'll deal with it myself." Situations like this weren't new. Not entirely. Since he had started looking into the possibility of someone helping him during that missing time, a few individuals had come forward, attempting to claim that role. None of them had succeeded. It wasn't difficult to see through them. Motive. Inconsistencies. Greed. They always gave themselves away. And this sounded no different. When he stepped into the lobby, the noise died instantly. His presence had that effect. His gaze swept across the space, landing briefly on the figure in question. Thin, worn, unsteady on his feet, a visible limp, and pregnant. Kai's expression didn't change, but something inside him shifted. Subtle, sharp, unwelcome. He ignored it. Stepping forward, he listened as the situation was explained, his eyes returning to the Omega once more. Calm, measured, assessing. This didn't make sense. Not in any version of his world. Someone like him, with someone like that? Impossible. There was no scenario where that aligned with who he was. His choices. His standards. How could I possibly know someone like him? The words came easily. Logical. Expected. And yet, The moment they left his mouth, something twisted sharply in his chest. A sudden, inexplicable discomfort. Like something inside him had rejected the answer before he could process it. His gaze lingered a fraction. Longer than necessary, his brows tightening almost imperceptibly as he studied the Omega again. The way he stood, the way he held himself, the way his hand rested over his stomach, not defensively, but protectively. Familiar. The thought flickered and disappeared just as quickly. Kai's expression hardened slightly. No, this was nothing. Just another attempt. Another lie. Another person hoping to gain something from him. And yet, as the Omega turned to leave, his uneven steps slow but steady, Kai felt it again. Stronger this time. That same unsettling pull. That same quiet, insistent feeling that something about him, wasn't right. His fingers tightened slightly at his side. For a brief moment, his instincts, sharp, reliable, never wrong, whispered something he couldn't quite hear. Something just out of reach. Something important. And for the first time in a long while, Kai hesitated. But by the time Kai took a step forward, the Omega was already gone. Just like that. No hesitation. No second glance. The space he had occupied moments ago felt strangely empty, as if something important had slipped through Kai's fingers without him even realizing it. He stood there for a second longer than necessary, his gaze lingering on the exit, an unfamiliar tightness settling in his chest. It didn't make sense. It shouldn't matter. And yet it did. The feeling didn't go away. It followed him, quiet, persistent, growing heavier with each passing day. An irritation at first, then something closer to restlessness, and eventually, something dangerously close to regret. Did I miss something? He muttered one evening, his fingers tapping absently against the desk. He replayed the scene again and again, every word, every detail. The way the Omega had looked at him. Not pleading, not desperate, just hopeful. And then, calm, accepting. That was what bothered him the most. Not the claim, not the situation, but that expression. It didn't fit someone who was lying. Or maybe. Kai exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. He really was just another fraud. The conclusion should have settled it. Should have ended the thought entirely. But it didn't. The unease remained. 2 weeks later, Kai found himself standing at the edge of a place he had no reason to visit. The company had plans. A redevelopment project. The area was scheduled to be cleared, rebuilt into something more profitable, cleaner, more suitable. But as he stepped into the narrow streets, his brows furrowed slightly. It was worse than he expected. The air felt heavier. The buildings older. Everything worn down to the point where even standing there felt uncomfortable. And yet, he didn't leave. Instead, he kept walking. Slowly. Without direction. Without reason. Or at least, none he could explain. Something pulled him forward. A strange, quiet familiarity that didn't belong to this place, but felt tied to it all the same. Why does this feel? He muttered under his breath, stopping briefly as his gaze swept over the surroundings. He didn't finish the sentence, because he didn't have an answer. Kai. A voice interrupted his thoughts. Soft. A little rough with age. He turned slightly, surprised, as an elderly woman stood behind him, her eyes narrowing as she looked him over carefully. You came back, she said, her tone carrying something between suspicion and quiet anger. To find Elliot? Kai stilled. You know me? He asked, his voice more cautious now. The woman scoffed, crossing her arms. Of course I do, she snapped. Or what? Now that you've got money again, you don't recognize people like us anymore. Kai frowned slightly, immediately shaking his head. That's not. He paused, then took a breath. Can we talk somewhere else? The shift in his tone made her hesitate. Then, with a reluctant nod, she turned slightly. Fine. A few minutes later, standing just outside the noise of the street, Kai spoke first. I lost part of my memory, he said directly. No hesitation. No attempt to soften it. There's a gap. I've been trying to find out what happened during that time. The woman's expression changed. Just slightly. I believe someone helped me, Kai continued. And I think that person might be Elliot. Silence followed. Then the woman let out a long breath, her shoulders lowering slightly, as something in her expression shifted from anger to something more complicated. So you don't remember anything, she said quietly. No, Kai answered. But I want to. She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing something. Then, slowly, she began to speak. When he brought you back, he hid you like his life depended on it, she said. Didn't tell anyone. Not even me at first. Kai's fingers tightened slightly at his side. All of a sudden, that boy started working like he'd lost his mind. she continued, her voice sharpening. Running everywhere, asking about medicine, buying things from places he shouldn't even know about. I thought he'd gotten himself into trouble. A pause. Then I found out. Her eyes hardened slightly. He was hiding you. Kai didn't speak. I was furious, she admitted. Told him he was stupid. Bringing home some stranger he knew nothing about. Said he'd regret it. Her gaze shifted, distant now. But he wouldn't listen. No matter what I said, he wouldn't let you go. Kai's chest tightened. I've watched that boy grow up, she went on quietly. Seen him go through things no one should have to. I was afraid you'd just make it worse. A small pause. Then, but he was happy. The words landed heavier than anything else. Happier than I'd ever seen him. Kai's breath slowed. So I stayed quiet, she said. Because I thought, maybe this time, something good finally happened to him. Her voice hardened again. Turns out I was wrong. Silence stretched between them. When you disappeared, she continued, he looked for you everywhere. Didn't eat. Didn't sleep. Just kept going. Kai's jaw tightened. And those people around here, she scoffed bitterly. They enjoyed it. Couldn't stand seeing him doing better, so they made sure to remind him where he belonged. Kai didn't trust himself to speak. He lost his job, she added. Of course he did. Who's going to hire a limping Omega, pregnant on top of that? Her voice dropped. Every day he went out, morning till night, looking for work, starving half the time. A pause. If I hadn't been watching out for him, I don't even know what would have happened. Kai closed his eyes briefly, just for a second. He's doing a little better now, she said finally. Found a small job. Then she looked at him directly. So what are you going to do? Kai didn't answer right away. For the first time in a long time, he didn't have one. I don't know, he admitted quietly. I can't remember. And I can't just accept something like that without understanding it. A pause. His voice steadied slightly. But if that child is mine, his fingers curled slightly. Then I'll take responsibility. The woman studied him for a moment longer, then sighed. He's working at a small diner down the street. Kai nodded once, and went. He didn't approach immediately, didn't call out. Instead, he stood at a distance, watching. Elliot was there, sitting on a worn wooden chair just outside the diner, one hand holding a small bottle of water, the other resting gently over his stomach. His body looked thinner than before, almost fragile. The curve of his pregnancy stood out more because of it, his clothes loose and faded, clearly worn for far too long. His skin looked pale, tired, and yet, his eyes were still the same, bright, soft, carrying that quiet warmth Kai couldn't explain. Elliot smiled faintly, his fingers moving slightly as if soothing the baby inside him, his lips forming silent words no one else could hear. The sight struck something deep inside Kai, a dull ache, sharp enough to notice, quiet enough to linger. And for the first time, he didn't look away. Kai moved before he could stop himself. The distance that had felt safe just seconds ago disappeared in a few long strides, his polished shoes out of place against the worn ground, his presence cutting through the small, quiet space like something that didn't belong, and yet, somehow did. Elliot looked up at the sudden shadow falling over him, startled, his fingers tightening instinctively around the bottle in his hand. For a brief second, his eyes widened, disbelief flashing across his face so clearly it didn't need words. You. His voice caught, soft, almost breathless. Why are you here? Kai stopped just a step away from him, close enough now to see everything he hadn't allowed himself to notice before. The way Elliot's face had grown thinner, the faint exhaustion beneath his eyes, the way his body seemed too light for the life he was carrying. Something in Kai's chest tightened, but he didn't show it. My name is Kai Vale, he said, his tone calm, controlled, though quieter than usual. You came to find me before. Elliot's fingers trembled slightly. I know, he whispered. Kai continued, his gaze steady, not looking away this time. I owe you an apology. Elliot blinked, caught off guard. I lost part of my memory, Kai said directly. I didn't recognize you that day. Before that, there were people who tried to take advantage of that situation, claiming things that weren't true. His jaw tightened slightly. I thought you were one of them. Silence fell between them, heavy but fragile. I regret that, Kai added, his voice lower now. Elliot stared at him for a long moment, the shock slowly giving way to something softer, something more complicated. You lost your memory? He repeated quietly. Then, now do you remember? There was a flicker of hope there. Small, careful. Kai saw it. And for the first time, he hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he understood what it would do. No, he said. Honest. Direct. I don't. The hope didn't shatter. Not completely. But it dimmed, just enough to be seen. Elliot lowered his gaze slightly, his hand instinctively resting over his stomach, his fingers brushing gently, as if grounding himself. I see, he murmured. There was disappointment. Of course there was. But beneath it, relief. Quiet, steady relief. At least now, there was an answer. But I know enough. Kai continued, his voice firmer now. Elliot looked up again. I've heard what happened, Kai said. About you. About us. The word felt unfamiliar on his tongue, but not wrong. And the child, his gaze dropped briefly to Elliot's stomach before returning to his eyes, is mine. Elliot didn't respond right away. He just stood there, absorbing it, his expression unreadable for a moment before something in it softened again. Not happiness. Not quite. But something close to acceptance. So, you came here because of that? He asked gently. Kai didn't deny it. I came because I should have come sooner, he corrected. A pause. I may not remember what we had, he said, slower now, choosing his words carefully. But I know you saved me. His voice lowered slightly. And I know I owe you more than what I gave you that day. Elliot's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. If you're willing, Kai continued, his tone steady, leaving no room for doubt. I want you to come with me. Elliot froze. I can provide for you, Kai said. For both of you. His gaze softened just slightly, almost imperceptibly. You won't have to struggle like this anymore. The world seemed to quiet around them. I'll take responsibility. The words were clear, firm, absolute. And yet, something in Elliot's expression didn't change the way it should have. He didn't smile, didn't cry, didn't immediately agree. He just looked at Kai, quietly, as if searching for something that wasn't there anymore. Or maybe, something that hadn't come back yet. And for the first time since he arrived, Kai felt it again, that same strange, unsettling feeling in his chest. Like he was offering the right thing in the wrong way. Kai didn't waste any time. The moment Elliot agreed to go with him, he brought him to the best hospital in the city, a place so clean and quiet it felt like a completely different world from where Elliot had been living. Elliot sat stiffly on the examination bed, his hands resting carefully over his stomach, clearly out of place among the polished floors and advanced equipment, his eyes quietly observing everything with a mix of curiosity and unease. Kai stood beside him, arms crossed at first, his expression composed, but his gaze never really left Elliot. When the results came back, the doctor spoke calmly. The Omega is moderately undernourished, he said. But fortunately, the fetus is developing normally. Kai's brows tightened slightly at the first part, a flicker of guilt passing through him, but it eased just a little at the second. We'll need to improve his nutrition immediately, the doctor added. Regular monitoring as well. Elliot nodded quickly. I'll be careful, he said softly. Then came the moment neither of them expected. The screen lit up. A small, moving shape. And then, the sound. A steady, rhythmic heartbeat filled the room. Elliot froze. His fingers curled slightly against the edge of the bed, his eyes widening as he stared at the screen, his lips parting without a sound. That's, he whispered. Kai didn't speak. He couldn't, because something in his chest had just shifted, deep, undeniable, almost overwhelming. The sound of that heartbeat, it didn't feel distant. It didn't feel abstract. It felt real. Too real. His gaze remained fixed on the image, his usually steady breath faltering just slightly. For the first time in a long time, Kai Vale felt something he couldn't immediately control. A connection. Quiet. Strong. Instinctive. As if, somewhere deep inside, something had already recognized what his mind could not yet remember. This is mine, he thought, not with doubt, but with certainty. And for the first time, the word family didn't feel like a concept. It felt close. After the appointment, Kai didn't hesitate. Come live with me, he said simply. Elliot looked at him, startled. It'll be easier for me to take care of you there, Kai continued. And safer. Elliot hesitated. Not because he didn't want to, but because something inside him still held back. Still. Unsure. Still cautious. Okay, he said finally, his voice quiet. Maybe, just maybe, if they stayed together, something would come back. Even a little. The car ride to Kai's home was silent. And when Elliot stepped out in front of the large estate, he stopped. Completely. The house was nothing like anything he had ever known. Wide. Elegant. Perfect. Every detail precise. Every corner reflecting a life far removed from his own. He felt it immediately. The distance. The difference. This is... Elliot trailed off, unsure what word to use. Kai didn't notice. Or perhaps he did, but didn't know how to respond to it. Inside, the staff lined up neatly, their posture respectful, their expressions controlled. Kai introduced him simply. This is Elliot. He'll be staying here from now on. Elliot bowed slightly out of instinct, his movements careful, almost hesitant. Hello, he murmured. Some of them nodded. Some didn't. Kai turned to the house staff. Prepare a room for him. Make sure everything he needs is arranged. Yes, sir. With that, Kai left for work shortly after, as if everything had already been decided. The house returned to its quiet rhythm, but Elliot didn't. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary, his fingers lightly gripping the fabric of his clothes, his gaze moving slowly across the unfamiliar space. It was too big, too clean, too much. That night, after a long day filled with more changes than he could process, Kai sat alone in his study, finally allowing himself a moment to think. What am I supposed to do with him? He muttered under his breath. He leaned back slightly, closing his eyes for a brief moment. He still didn't remember. Not the past, not the feelings, not the version of himself that had chosen Elliot. And yet, there was no resistance in him, no rejection, just uncertainty. It doesn't matter, he said finally. I'll take care of them. If he couldn't remember, then this would be his way of repaying what he owed. And strangely, the quiet emptiness he had carried for months no longer felt quite as hollow. Meanwhile, Elliot's life inside the estate began, uneven, uncertain, and far from peaceful. At first, it was just looks, small things, lingering glances, whispers that stopped the moment he passed by. Then came the words, quiet enough to deny, sharp enough to hurt. So that's him. He doesn't look like anything special. How did he even get here? Probably clinging to the boss because of that child. Who knows if it's even his? Elliot heard them. Of course he did. But like always, he didn't respond. He just lowered his gaze slightly, his hand resting over his stomach, his steps careful, quiet, as if making himself smaller would make it easier. But it didn't stop. It never did. The more he stayed silent, the bolder they became. Dismissive looks turned into open disdain. Small remarks turned into direct mockery. And Elliot endured it, like he always had. Kai, busy as he was, didn't notice immediately. But he noticed enough. Elliot spoke less, smiled less. The light in his eyes dimmed just slightly, not enough for anyone else to see, but enough for Kai to feel. Keep an eye on him, Kai told the housekeeper one evening. Yes, sir. It didn't take long. The truth surfaced quickly. The whispers, the treatment, the way Elliot was being pushed, tested, ignored. The housekeeper stepped in immediately when she saw it, stopping things before they could escalate further. But that wasn't enough, because Kai heard about it. And when he did, something in him hardened. Send him to my study, he said quietly. A few minutes later, Elliot stood at the door, knocking softly. Come in. He stepped inside, his posture careful, his expression calm. But there was a faint tension in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. Kai looked at him for a moment, then spoke. Are you uncomfortable here? Kai's gaze didn't leave Elliot as he stood quietly in front of the desk, fingers lightly clasped together, posture careful, as if he were afraid to take up too much space. The silence stretched for a moment before Kai spoke again, his voice low but firm. Why didn't you tell me? Elliot blinked, clearly not expecting the question. About what? About what's been happening in this house, Kai said, his tone sharpening slightly. Elliot hesitated, then lowered his gaze, a small, almost apologetic smile forming. It's nothing important, he said softly. I didn't want to bother you with small things like that. You're already busy. Kai's brows tightened. Small things, he repeated. Elliot nodded gently. I'm used to it, he added, as if that alone explained everything. Before, I've heard worse. That answer stopped Kai for a second. Something about the way Elliot said it, so calm, so matter-of-fact, didn't sit right with him. Then why don't you do anything about it? Kai asked, his voice quieter now, but edged with something harder. Why do you just let them treat you like that? Elliot thought about it for a moment, then answered honestly. When I was younger, I did try to fight back, he said. But I realized that the more I resisted, the worse things became. His fingers shifted slightly over his stomach, absent-minded, grounding. So I stopped. Kai's jaw tightened. That logic, it made sense. And yet, it made him uncomfortable. I'll have them dismissed, Kai said suddenly, his tone decisive. Elliot looked up immediately, startled. No, please don't, he said quickly, taking a small step forward despite himself. Kai frowned. Why not? Elliot hesitated, then spoke carefully. They're just people trying to live their lives, he said. Everyone has their own difficulties. He paused, then added more quietly. The girl from earlier, She has a husband who drinks too much. 3 children. I heard she's the only one working. Kai said nothing. Maybe life is just too hard for her, Elliot continued. That's why she becomes like that. His voice remained gentle, not defensive, not bitter, just understanding. If she loses this job, her whole family will suffer. The room fell silent again. Kai stared at him, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. They treat you like that, he said slowly. And you still want to protect them? Elliot blinked, then smiled faintly. The way they treat others, that's about them, he said softly. Not about me. Kai stilled. My mom used to say. Elliot continued, his voice warm now, carrying something distant but deeply rooted. No matter how hard things get, if you can stay positive and believe in good things, eventually, something good will happen. A small pause. Then he looked up at Kai, his eyes clear, sincere. And I think it did. The words settled into the air quietly, but heavily. Something about them felt familiar. Too familiar. Kai didn't respond right away. He couldn't, because for a brief second, something in his mind stirred, just slightly, like a memory trying to surface but slipping away before it could fully form. He looked at Elliot, really looked this time, and that strange feeling in his chest returned, stronger now, deeper, harder to ignore. I see, Kai said finally, his voice lower than before. He turned slightly, his expression unreadable again, but his tone had changed. You can go. Elliot hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Okay. He turned and left quietly, just as he always did. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Kai remained where he was, unmoving, his thoughts heavier than they had been all day. Later that evening, the atmosphere in the house shifted subtly. The staff who had been whispering earlier were called together, their expressions uneasy as the housekeeper delivered Kai's words clearly. Mr. Vale is aware of what has been happening, she said, and he is not pleased. A ripple of tension spread through the room. However, she continued, her gaze firm, you have all been given another chance. Surprise flickered across several faces. It was Elliot who asked for that, she added. Silence followed. Real silence this time. The kind that carried weight. The kind that made people think. The girl who had spoken the harshest earlier lowered her head first, her fingers tightening slightly. She hesitated, then swallowed. I didn't think, no one did. That was the problem. The next day, when Elliot stepped into the hallway, he noticed it immediately. The absence of whispers. The absence of cold stares. Instead, hesitation. The girl approached him slowly, her posture stiff, uncertain. I'm sorry, she said, her voice quiet, lacking the sharpness from before. About everything. Elliot blinked, surprised, then smiled gently. It's okay, he said, and he meant it. The girl looked up at him, confused for a moment, as if she didn't understand how someone could respond like that. But something in her expression softened. Around them, others followed. Not all at once. Not perfectly, but enough. The atmosphere changed. Not because they were afraid of Kai, but because, for the first time, they felt something else. Something unfamiliar. Something closer to guilt. And respect. And somewhere, watching all of this unfold quietly from a distance, Kai stood still, his gaze resting on Elliot for a moment longer than necessary. That strange emptiness in his chest felt just a little less hollow. From that day on, something in Kai changed, not all at once, not in a way he could clearly define, but enough that even he could no longer ignore it. He began to notice Elliot more, not just as someone he had a responsibility toward, but as someone who quietly occupied his attention without asking for it. At first, it was subtle, the way his eyes would follow Elliot's uneven steps across the room without meaning to. The way his hand would instinctively reach out when Elliot moved too quickly, as if his body already knew what to do before his mind caught up. One evening, Elliot nearly lost his balance while reaching for something on a high shelf, his bad leg faltering just slightly. Before he could steady himself, Kai was already there, one hand firm around his arm, the other supporting his back. The movement was natural, immediate, too natural. They both froze for a second. Elliot blinked up at him, surprised. I'm okay, he said softly. Kai didn't let go right away. His fingers lingered just a moment longer than necessary before he pulled back, his expression tightening slightly, as if trying to understand something he couldn't explain. It kept happening. Small things. Unintentional things. Like the way his hand would brush Elliot's hair back from his face without thinking, fingers moving gently, as if he had done it countless times before. Or the way, when they passed by a small street vendor one afternoon, Kai suddenly stopped, his gaze lingering on a simple dish among many others. This, he said, almost to himself. Elliot looked at it, then at him. Do you want to try it? He asked. Kai hesitated. No, he said after a moment. But the feeling remained. Familiar. Insistent. Later that night, when Elliot cooked something simple in the kitchen, just basic ingredients, nothing special, Kai found himself sitting at the table, eating in silence. The food was plain, not refined, not even close to what he was used to. And yet, he didn't stop. Is it okay? Elliot asked, a little unsure. Kai paused briefly, then nodded once. It's fine. But something in his expression softened. Because somehow, it felt more right than anything he had eaten in a long time. There were other things he couldn't explain. Omega pheromones had never affected him before, not in any meaningful way. He had control. Always. But lately, whenever other omegas approached him, especially those who tried too hard, the scent they released only made him uncomfortable. Irritated. Even repulsed. You don't seem interested, one of them had said lightly, trying to mask the disappointment. Kai didn't respond. Because he didn't need to. It wasn't disinterest. It was rejection. Complete and instinctive. And yet, when he stood near Elliot, when the faint, natural scent that Elliot didn't even try to control lingered in the air, everything changed. It was calm, warm, steady, like something that belonged. Something his body recognized long before his mind did. One evening, Elliot was sitting by the window again, one hand resting over his stomach, a soft smile on his face as he watched the sky slowly darken. Kai stopped a few steps away, observing quietly. He moved again. Elliot said gently, looking up at him. Do you want to feel? Kai hesitated. Just for a second. Then stepped closer. Elliot guided his hand carefully, placing it over the curve of his stomach. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a small movement. Light, brief, but undeniable. Kai froze. His fingers stilled, his breath catching almost imperceptibly as something deep inside him reacted instantly, powerfully, without permission. Elliot watched him, his smile softening. You can talk to her, he said quietly. She'll recognize your voice. Kai frowned slightly, unsure. I wouldn't know what to say. Elliot chuckled softly. Anything is fine. A pause. Kai looked down at his hand, then spoke, a little stiff at first. I'm here. The words sounded simple, almost awkward. But the moment they left his mouth, something flickered through his mind. Quick, fragmented, gone before he could grasp it. A room. A voice. Warmth. Kai's expression tightened slightly, his other hand moving instinctively to his temple. What is it? Elliot asked, concern immediately replacing the softness in his tone. Nothing, Kai said, though his voice was quieter now. Just something strange. It happened more often after that. Brief flashes. Incomplete images. Feelings without context. Every time he got close to understanding them, they slipped away, leaving behind only a dull ache and a growing frustration. One night, it was worse. Kai leaned against the desk, eyes closed, his fingers pressing lightly against his forehead as the faint pain lingered. It's like something is there, he said, his voice low. But I can't reach it. Elliot watched him quietly, then stepped closer, his movements slow, careful. Then don't force it, he said gently. Kai opened his eyes slightly, looking at him. Elliot smiled, soft, patient, the same as always. Memories aren't something you can chase, he continued. If they want to come back, they will. A pause. His hand rested lightly over his stomach again. I can. Wait, he added quietly. As long as it takes. Kai's gaze lingered on him. Even if I never remember? Elliot didn't hesitate. That's okay too. His smile didn't fade. Right now, I'm already very happy. The words settled into the silence between them, simple, honest, unguarded. And for a moment, Kai felt it again, that strange, unfamiliar warmth in his chest. Not sharp, not overwhelming, just steady, like something that had always been there, waiting for him to notice. Kai didn't return to the slum as a CEO that day. He returned as someone trying to repay a debt he couldn't measure. The small diner looked the same, worn and quiet, but the moment he stepped inside, the owner recognized him immediately. There was no welcome, only a long, heavy look. You've got guts coming back here, the man muttered. Kai didn't defend himself. I came to ask about Elliot. The man scoffed softly, but after a moment, he spoke about how Elliot worked until he could barely stand, how he gave away food even when he had none, how he smiled through everything. Kai listened in silence, each word pressing deeper than the last. When he left, he said nothing, but within days, the diner received quiet support, better equipment, a larger space, enough to ease the man's burdens. No name attached, just a note, for taking care of him when I couldn't. The old woman was next. She didn't hide her anger when she saw him. "So you remember us now?" she snapped. Kai bowed his head slightly. "Thank you," he said simply. The words caught her off guard. He didn't explain further, but soon after, her home was repaired, her life made easier in ways she couldn't ignore, even if she pretended to complain. The last person he met was the young girl. She didn't hold back. "What do you want now?" she asked coldly. "You weren't there when he needed you." Kai accepted it. "Tell me about him." She hesitated, then spoke, her voice softer with each word. "He never hated you," she said. "Not once." Kai's fingers stilled. "Even when everyone called you heartless, he defended you. Said you must have had a reason." She swallowed. "He said those days with you were the happiest in his life." Silence wrapped around them. "And the baby?" Kai asked quietly. "He called it a gift," she replied. "The only family he had." That was the moment something in Kai shifted completely. Not guilt alone, but something deeper, something resolute. He looked at her, his voice steady but low. "Thank you." Then he turned to leave, pausing only once at the door. "I won't leave him again." This time, it wasn't uncertainty. It was an obligation. It was a decision. And this time, he would keep it. The first time Kai's mother saw Elliot, she didn't react the way others did. There was no immediate disdain, no visible contempt, just a long, measured silence as her sharp eyes took in everything. The limp, the worn posture, the quiet way Elliot stood slightly behind Kai, as if he didn't belong beside him. "So, this is him," she said finally, her tone calm, almost too calm. Elliot bowed instinctively. "Hello, ma'am." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned to Kai. "I'd like to speak with him. Alone." Kai's expression shifted slightly. "There's nothing you can't say in front of me." "There is," she replied, her voice firm but not raised. A pause. Then, quietly, "Unless you don't trust me." Kai didn't answer immediately. Then, after a brief hesitation, he turned to Elliot. "I'll be outside." Elliot nodded. "Okay." When the door closed, the air changed. The warmth disappeared, replaced by something colder, more precise. Kai's mother looked at Elliot again, this time without restraint. "I should thank you," she said. Elliot blinked, surprised. "For saving my son." Her voice remained composed. "If not for you, he might not be standing here today." Elliot lowered his gaze slightly. "I didn't do anything special." "You did enough," she corrected. A pause. Then, "Which is why I won't treat you unfairly." Elliot's fingers tightened slightly. He understood what that meant. "You are kind," she continued. "And from what I've heard, patient, gentle, strong in your own way." Elliot said nothing. "But you are not suitable for him." The words were not harsh, but they were absolute. Elliot's breath stilled. "Kai's position is not stable yet," she went on. "His enemies are still watching. His allies are still uncertain. What he needs is a partner who can strengthen his position." Her gaze sharpened slightly. "An omega with influence. With background. With compatibility." Elliot remained still. "We have already found someone," she added. "A match with over 95% compatibility. A family that aligns perfectly with his future." Silence. "And you," she finished, "are none of those things." Elliot's fingers slowly curled against his palm. "You are a good person," she said. But goodness alone is not enough in his world. A small envelope was placed on the table between them. "This is compensation," she said, "for everything you've done. It is more than enough for you and your child to live comfortably." Elliot didn't look at it. "Leave," she said quietly, "before things become more difficult." The room fell silent again. Long, heavy. Then Elliot bowed his head. "I understand." His voice was soft, calm. No anger. No protest. Just acceptance. That night, Elliot packed quietly. There wasn't much to take. There never was. His hand rested over his stomach for a moment longer than usual. "It's okay," he whispered. "This is better for him." He left before dawn. Without saying goodbye, Kai noticed immediately. The room was empty. The air was wrong. "Elliot." No answer. Something in his chest dropped sharply. "Where is he?" he asked, his voice already tightening. The staff hesitated. That was enough. Kai didn't wait. He left, searching. Every place. Every possibility. The feeling in his chest grew heavier with each passing second, something close to panic clawing its way up for the first time in years. "No," he muttered under his breath. "Not again." He found him just as the sky began to lighten, standing alone at the edge of a quiet street, one hand resting over his stomach, his posture steady but small. "Elliot." The name came out sharper than he intended. Elliot turned, surprised. Kai closed the distance in seconds, his grip firm around Elliot's arm. Why did you leave? Elliot didn't answer right away. Kai's gaze hardened. Did my mother say something to you? Silence. That was answer enough. Something in Kai snapped. I told you to stay, he said, his voice low, controlled, but trembling just slightly beneath it. Elliot looked at him quietly. It's not your fault, he said softly. She's right. No. Kai cut in immediately. She's not. Elliot shook his head gently. You have a future, Kai, he said. A position. A responsibility. You need someone who can stand beside you. His hand pressed lightly against his stomach. Not someone like me. Kai stared at him. Then what about me? Elliot blinked. What about what I want? Kai's voice dropped, raw in a way Elliot had never heard before. You think this is about obligation? A step closer. You think I'm doing this because I have to? Elliot didn't answer. Because he didn't know. Kai's grip tightened slightly. I don't remember everything, he said. I don't remember how it started. Or what we had. His voice wavered, just slightly. But I know one thing. A pause. The moment you walked away, it felt like I was losing something I can't replace. Elliot's breath caught. So don't tell me what I need, Kai said, his eyes locked onto Elliot's. Because right now what I need is you. Silence. If my mother can't accept that, he continued, his voice steady again, unwavering now, then she doesn't need to accept me either. Elliot's eyes widened slightly. Kai exhaled slowly. Because if it weren't for you, his voice softened, just a little, I wouldn't even be here. The words settled deeply between them. Elliot's fingers trembled slightly. And then, it happened. A sound. A memory. The faint echo of laughter. A small, dim room. A broken chair. A voice, soft, warm, calling his name. Kai's expression froze. His grip loosened slightly as his breath hitched. Kai. Elliot's voice pulled him back. No, not back. Forward. The memories came all at once. Not fragments. Not pieces. Everything. The nights. The warmth. The laughter. The way Elliot smiled. The way he spoke. The way he stayed. Elliot. Kai's voice broke. His hand moved to his head, his knees giving slightly under the weight of it all. I remember, his vision blurred. Not from pain. From something else. Something heavier. I remember everything. Elliot stared at him, stunned. Kai looked up at him again, his eyes no longer distant, no longer searching, but filled with something raw, overwhelming, undeniable. I'm sorry, he said, his voice shaking for the first time. I'm so sorry. His hands trembled as he reached for Elliot, pulling him close without hesitation, holding him carefully, as if afraid he might disappear again. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up on me. Elliot closed his eyes slowly, his hand resting lightly against Kai's back. I never did, he said softly. And this time, there was nothing left to forget. The day Elliot went into labor, nothing went according to plan, and for the first time in a long time, Kai Vale completely lost his composure. It started quietly, with Elliot gripping the edge of the table, his breath uneven, a faint crease forming between his brows. Kai, he called softly. That was all it took. Within seconds, Kai was at his side, his usual calm shattered, his hands hovering uncertainly as if he didn't know where to touch without hurting him. Is it time? His voice was tight, controlled only on the surface. Elliot nodded, managing a small smile despite the discomfort. I think so. What followed was chaos, at least to Kai. The drive to the hospital felt too slow no matter how fast he went, his eyes flicking to Elliot every few seconds, his grip on the steering wheel tighter than it had ever been in any negotiation, any deal, any moment of his life. Breathe, he kept saying, even though it sounded like he was reminding himself more than Elliot. I am. Elliot replied softly, still calm, still steady in a way that only made Kai more restless. Hours later, when the first cry finally filled the room, everything stopped. Completely. Kai stood there, frozen, his gaze fixed on the tiny life now wrapped carefully in soft fabric, his chest rising and falling just a little too slowly. Your son, the nurse said gently. Son. The word didn't feel distant. It didn't feel abstract. It felt real. Overwhelmingly real. When they placed the baby in his arms, Kai hesitated for the briefest second, then held him, carefully, like something more precious than anything he had ever known. He's small, he murmured, almost in disbelief. Elliot let out a quiet laugh from the bed, exhausted but glowing in a way Kai had never seen before. You were expecting him to be bigger? Kai didn't answer. He was still staring, still trying to process the way something so small could completely shift the weight of his world. What should we name him? Elliot asked softly. Kai glanced at him, then back at the baby. A pause. Then, quietly, Ethan. Elliot smiled. Ethan, he repeated gently. I like that. Life after that didn't slow down, but it changed. In ways neither of them could have imagined before. Mornings were no longer quiet. They were filled with soft cries, small movements, the sound of tiny hands reaching for warmth. Kai, who once controlled entire rooms with a single glance, now found himself carefully adjusting a blanket at 3 in the morning, his expression more focused than any board meeting had ever required. Is he supposed to make that sound? He asked once, slightly concerned. Elliot, half asleep, chuckled softly. He's just hungry. Again. Yes, again. Kai exhaled, but there was no real frustration in it. Only something softer, something quieter. And when Ethan finally settled, Kai would sit there a moment longer than necessary, watching him, as if memorizing every detail. Lily, on the other hand, grew up bright and lively, her laughter filling the house in a way that made everything feel warmer. One afternoon, Kai arrived at her school to pick her up, his usual composed expression softening the moment he saw her running toward him. Dad, she called, her small hands reaching out. Kai crouched slightly, catching her easily. Did you behave today? He asked, his tone calm. But there was a hint of curiosity in it. The teacher approached, a polite smile on her face, though her eyes carried a bit of concern. Mr. Vale, there was a small incident today. Kai straightened slightly. What kind of incident? Lily hesitated, glancing down. She got into a fight, the teacher explained gently. Kai's brows lifted slightly. Is that so? He looked down at Lily. Do you want to explain? Lily puffed her cheeks slightly, clearly conflicted, then said, he said something bad. What did he say? Kai asked calmly. Lily's small hands clenched. He said Papa was not good. That Papa walks funny. Silence. For a brief moment, Kai said nothing. Then, he reached out, gently placing a hand on Lily's head. You defended your Papa, he said. Lily looked up, unsure. Is that bad? Kai's lips curved slightly. No, he said. That part was right. Lily's eyes brightened just a little. But, Kai added calmly, next time, you should do it more strategically. The teacher blinked, caught off guard. Kai continued smoothly. Words can be more effective than actions. Make sure they understand why they're wrong, without giving them a reason to complain about you. Lily nodded seriously, as if absorbing something very important. Okay. On the way home, Lily held his hand, swinging it lightly. Can we bring something for Papa? She asked suddenly. Kai glanced down at her, then nodded. They stopped by a small shop, and Kai picked out a large bouquet. Soft colors, gentle, just like Elliot. When they arrived home, the door barely opened before a small figure came crawling quickly across the floor. Duh, Ethan babbled, reaching out with both hands. Kai bent down without hesitation, lifting him easily into his arms. You're getting faster, he said quietly. From the kitchen, Elliot stepped out, wiping his hands lightly on a towel, his eyes softening instantly at the sight in front of him. Lily ran over, holding up the flowers proudly. Papa, for you. Elliot blinked, surprised, then smiled. Warm, bright, the same as it had always been. They're beautiful, he said gently. Kai walked over slowly, Ethan still in his arms, his gaze meeting Elliot's for a brief second that said more than words ever could. The room filled with quiet laughter soon after. Lily talking excitedly, Ethan babbling, Kai responding in his own calm way, Elliot watching it all with that same soft smile. The kind that didn't fade, the kind that had survived everything. And now, finally, had a place to stay.